might like to know how Carefree came to be. We think the following presentation should be a tribute to John Olson. A group of Airstreamers at a rally led by John Olson decided they wanted to build an RV park for Airstream trailers. They knew of two other Airstream parks already in existence, one in California and the other in Melbourne, Florida. So a group went to each park and came back to build one at Clear Lake, Minnesota. That park was built in 1970. It had 125 sites. In 1974, John Olson, Harry Oswald, and Dan Person built Travelers Country Club of Clear Lake. It had 200 sites. In 1978, Travelers Country Club on the Mississippi was built, again by Olson, Oswald, and Person. There were 299 sites there. It was to be a 4-year project and was completely sold out in 20 months. Lena and Harold Wargen purchased their first lot here in 1978 and moved into the park in 1979. Shortly after they got settled, John Olson asked Lena to work for him in the Welcome Building. John then asked Harold if he would help out on the golf course and sell lots. That is how the Wargens started a working relationship with John Olson. In 1981, John asked Harold to be his construction manager in the building of Carefree Country Club of Big Lake. So they started building the golf course and laying out the lots. Carefree North had 400 sites. It also was sold out very quickly. Some of the early buyers they had were the Vogels, the Gospeters, the Bowmans, the Loftuses, and many others. In late May of 1983, they started to put together the plans for Carefree Country Club of Winter Haven. August the 20th of that year, they started to sell lots. The Wargens trailer at Travelers was very busy that day. They sold 21 lots in Winter Haven in the afternoon and evening, with more calling to see if they could buy. John Olson found this property earlier and told the real estate agent that if it ever became available to contact him. In early 1983, John purchased this property, which was 102 acres, had 2,700 feet of lakeshore. It had 40 acres of oranges, grapefruit, and tangerines. Most trees in the grove were reaching the end of their lifespan. They kept the trees intact while they started cleaning dumping areas and clearing for the golf course. In September 1983, John Olson and Harold Wargen came to Carefree and began staking out lots. Then in October, John and Lois Olson, Gordy and Barb Prickett, Luther and Winnie Amron, and Harm and Dora Saunders arrived. Lena and Harold Wargen were in Europe at the time and arrived the first week in November. Here you see the Wargens RV parked just east of where the clubhouse now stands, near the cement slab where the gazebo is located. Gordy Prickett and Harold Wargen were co-managers of the park while it was under construction, while their wives managed the office. Later they had Dale and Bev Carr along with Walt and Faye Dude come to assist. Most areas that were not groves had been used as a dump by the previous owners. They had a tremendous job cleaning up those areas. They hired day help and formed lines going through what was to be the golf course, picking up glass and other waste materials. On some weekends, John Olson would fly down potential buyers from the Twin City area. He would charge them $100, and for that they got the trip, the stay at the Holiday Motel in Winter Haven, a day at Cypress Gardens, a scenic tour of the area, and then a trip to look over the park. Most purchased lots, and the $100 was deducted from their purchase price. Those who did not buy were refunded their $100. Harold Wargen had a lot diagram laid out in the area where they had parked. People looking could tell where the trailer, shed, palm tree, light post, etc. would be on each lot. The light post idea came from W&I Resort in Mission, Texas. Harold thought it would improve the looks of the lots and streets at night. When they laid out 8th Street, there was a large palm tree in the middle of it. They transplanted it into an area in front of the golf center. John thought it would look nice for each lot to have a palm tree on it, so that was contracted for. March the 1st, 1984, Carefree had sold 231 lots, and on March the 4th, all lots went up $2,000 each. Harold Wargen's team never had any advance notice when a price increase was going to be. John would never tell them until the night before, and the sales team would have to pass on the bad news. In building a park, they always constructed the golf course first. January the 16th, 1984, John Olson and Harold Wargen made the final layout for the course. Now to build it. They hired Dennis Knapp to help on the golf course. In March 1984, they started trenching for the irrigation system. They used all Toro equipment for the sprinkling system and had Bill Dodler from Minneapolis come down to install it. The golf course was covered mostly with palmettos, and most of them were dug up and spread on what is now the 7th fairway, and then covered with dirt, in order to raise the level. It was some time later that they discovered the small pond halfway down the fairway, number 1. That had to remain as a water collector, and the runoff swaled into the lagoon in front of the 6th tee. The pond on the 8th hole was just a swamp area that Harold could walk across in waders. They hired a dragline and a dozer to come in and dig it out. They used a dragline to form canals along the 6th and 7th fairways. These were fairly deep and about 10 feet wide. They have since pretty well filled in. Originally, the course had been planned to run the opposite direction, with number 1 being where number 9 is now. After looking it over, they decided to make the change. On some maps, it still shows it that way. John had a super worker who was an expert dozer operator. Written on his shirt, he was quoted as saying, "I am just a wild and crazy guy." On April 13th, 1984, Tifton Turf came in from Georgia and fumigated the greens. This was done to kill everything that would give them problems by damaging the greens after they were built. Then, on April the 17th, Tifton Turf started to sprig the fairways. They finished the golf course on April the 20th, 1984, and the Olsons, Prickett's, and Wargens had a tea party on the 9th green. Play started on the course the first week in August 1984. On May the 10th, 1984, Lena and Harold Wargen's new holiday park model arrived. They set it up in the same area where the other RVs were parked, under the big oak trees near where the clubhouse was to be. While they were building the golf course, they were brushing out and removing dead trees from other parts of the park. The fruit was sold when it ripened, and the trees they didn't want to save were removed and burned. It was then that they really got busy and started the layout of the lots. They had several crews in laying cement patios and pads for RVs to park on. On May the 16th, 1984, the perimeter fence was installed and the main gate was locked for the first time. On May the 20th, 1984, Joyce Kinsey, the daughter of the late owner, and her husband visited Carefree. She told them that the house was built in 1931 and burned to the ground in 1972 or 1973. There was still another house in the grove, a barn, and another house on the lakeshore. Also a guest house about where the hot tub is now. Carefree tore down the guest house and found footings of the other buildings. Her dad died in 1966. Carl Yastrzemski, the Boston Red Sox player, lived here in the house during the spring training in 1968 and 1969. June the 12th, 1984, Clint Randall and crew started laying out the sewer and water lines. John and Harold staked out the area for the clubhouse that day, and in August of 1984 they took out the trees where the clubhouse was to be and leveled the area. On August the 27th, 1984, they staked out the area for the sewer treatment plant, and on September the 18th, 1984, they started setting up the plant. At that time, the Polk County inspectors were here every day. They kept stating that our plant was the most up-to-date in the county, and they had plans of hooking it up to the Holiday Park and another park that was being built south of us on Thompson Nursery Road. The concrete was laid for the floor of the clubhouse. The precasts were then placed for the upper level. These sections each weighed 30,000 pounds. They used a 75-ton truck crane to set these. Terry Nystrom, who worked for Miller Construction and who built the clubhouse at Carefree North, was sent down here to build our clubhouse. He did most of the work himself and only subcontracted the work he needed help with. Terry lived for some time after the park opened at lot 876. December 1985, John Olson and his wife Lois celebrate the completion of the clubhouse. The excavation hole for the swimming pool was done in November of 1984 and ready to swim in by July 1985. The shuffleboard courts were built shortly after. The first electricity came into the park November the 21st, 1984. Wally and Gladys Charlstrom had theirs hooked up the very next day. They had waited a long time for that day. December the 13th, 1984, the sewer treatment plant went into service. And on Sunday, January the 6th, 1985, Carefree had its first church service held in the clubhouse. The pastor was Earl Ugair. Earl has since passed away. He and his wife Eva lived on 5th Street. With most things accomplished, and as usual, John Olson always did more than he said he would do. John hired our first park managers, a couple named Curtis and Alice Weeks. And John Olson went on to build yet another park after Carefree, our next-door neighbor, Lake Bess Country Club. John passed away in the spring of 2004. He will be remembered as a man whose mark of achievement will remain evident for years to come. And the rest is history.